Are you ready to
Welcome to Right Footers. Welcome to Right Kneers.
It's the Fox News version of it.
I am so excited to be back here with you guys. It has been a long time since someone so esteemed has sat in the big chair. It's something that, ever since I first saw the show, I admired the man in the big chair, his wit, his wisdom, his kindness, his intelligence. And I really hope you guys are as excited as I am that Star Trek Picard is on TV now. Because seeing JeanLuc Picard back in the big chair is extraordinary. What? Oh, Father Roger's back too. Well, he was actually back last time, and I haven't been with him.
Right here.
But I'm so excited that Picard's back. Also, nice to see you as well.
Nice to see you too, Mike. Actually, it is really exciting to see Picard back on, well, I guess we all have bigger screens now than like in the 1990s. So
Bigger, flatter screens.
Exactly,
Yes.
right?
What the hell are you doing out here, Picard? Saving the galaxy?
Engage.
It's a whole nostalgia trip. I love it. Have you seen much of the new series?
Oh, I'm watching it. I'll be watching it tonight when I get home. Very, very much enjoying it. Sarah, have you been enjoying it too?
Yeah, no, you both know I know nothing. However, I did watch. This is the epitome of my prep for this episode was that I listened to a podcast of them reviewing a Picard episode. So I wasn't even watching the Picard episode because I'm a student. I don't got no time to actually watch it because I don't even know the original series. So I have nothing to contribute other than shenanigans and a good head nod.
You know what? This actually sort of tastes what I would imagine synthahol would taste.
Non-alcoholic beer?
Yeah, tastes like juice.
I was half expecting you to bring Romulan ale, something blue.
It takes time for it to ferment.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah.
Romulan ale. Why, Bones, this is illegal.
I only use it for medicinal purposes.
Fun fact, because I saw this at the Star Trek Museum in Vulcan.
Yes.
Vulcan, Alberta.
True.
Yes.
My brother-in-law was the pastor in Vulcan, Alberta, so that was his parish included that for a while.
Why are you just telling me this?
He's not there anymore. He's in Chestermere now. But no, my wife's brother is a priest.
That is...
Hi, Father James Hagel. My brother-in-law is a priest. Actually, he did really enjoy this episode too. He's a big Star Trek guy as well, as I think most priests are.
I would hope so.
Father Paul Kavanaugh, biggest Star Trek fan I know.
Yeah. Bishop Greg Pittman of Kelowna. Is it Kelowna? Nelson. It's pretty much Kelowna. Actually, okay. No, it's going to be pretty much a lot of hate mail there. Sorry, Nelson. But he's a very big Star Trek fan as well.
So the buttons they use on the doors for Deep Space Nine, when you get a new stick of deodorant and you twist it up and the little plastic cap comes off the top of the deodorant?
Yeah.
That was the buttons they pushed to open the doors. They just spray painted those and glued them to the wall. On Deep Space Nine, on the station, the old Cardassian.
Kardashians used that?
Not the Kardashians, the Cardassians.
Sorry.
The Cardassians have no honor.
I'm now just imagining the Kardashians in space.
Well, there's a
and
whole,
it's
there's
really
a whole,
bad idea.
There's actually a number of memes about that. Like there's a
There
Kardashian invasion coming or something like that, and Picard blowing them up and things like that. So it's quite good.
Okay, so you wanted to talk about this for please enlighten us. Why was this the topic you were interested in?
It was the topic I was interested in because I think in many ways it is the thing that we need in today's world.
Just Star Trek is what we need in today's world.
Amen, brother.
bit.
Amen. Glory.
Just take all other TV off of
Actually,
anything.
pretty much. Like,
Okay, cool.
Compared to a lot
Good
of
to
other
know.
shows, like, here's the thing. Usually on evenings, when I'm tired and I just want to throw something on, guess what I turn to? The Next Generation. And I just pick a random episode and just watch it. Because there's the whole nostalgia thing, but there's also, I think, a deeper element that I would almost want to write as my own little Catholic hermeneutic of making sense of this universe. It works in my mind, and this is what I'm going to share with you.
Okay.
It is me imagining, in some ways, myself as Diogenes searching for the good man, searching for the man of virtue. And I think in many ways, as much as Star Trek is a secular show of, in some ways, a secular future, I don't think that actually is fully there. I don't think a full secularized future is possible, and I don't actually think in universe that's a thing. And I'll cite a couple examples, but I think most of the Star Trek shows actually try to sort of mimic that and try to find the man of virtue or the person of virtue that we can all try to love and aspire to. I think in the original series, it is Kirk being the cowboy pioneer in the wild, wild west of space, but also trying to make the right action at the right time.
Well, he was absolutely written to be a space cowboy. Like, and instead of, essentially he's the Lone Ranger in space. So he comes riding in on his horse, the Enterprise. He, does whatever he does. He gets the girl, Green or whatever she happens to be.
Yeah.
And then having done the right thing to the best of his ability, he rides off for the next adventure the next week.
Exactly.
And so what you had there was you had that story, and it was very simple, and in a lot of ways they didn't really develop it as far as they could because you only had 3 seasons, and it was kind of constantly on the brink of cancellation. Mm-hmm. A lot of season 3 of Star Trek was terrible because they were running with no budget, and they're repurposing. Spock's brain is awful. Awful episode of Star Trek.
Yeah, actually, sort of it. Well, yeah, it is.
We have been following the ion trail of the spaceship that has Spock's brain.
What would they want with Mr. Spock's brain? What use is it?
Time left to us to find Spock's brain. 8 hours and 29 minutes. What have you done with Spock's brain? What have you done with Spock's brain? What have you done?
Having had the benefit of later series, most of the time it was season 3 when they really kind of found their footing and turned it into something that you wanted to go back to, because I also have been watching Star Trek The Next Generation in some of my off time. And I'm watching my way through season 1 of Star Trek right now. And it's like walking through mud a little bit.
Yeah.
But what they really changed, what they really brought to light, Gene Roddenberry had this utopian vision of a future where humanity, by our own strength, had brought peace to the world, had eliminated corruption, had eliminated capitalism. We didn't need money anymore. Everybody just did what they were supposed to do because it was the right thing to do. Nobody's ever written about that before. And then we were going out to bring those same values to everybody else who are below us. It was very much this humanist future. But I would agree with you because the Next Generation kind of peaked with that. But then after Roddenberry passed away partway through the run of Next Generation, when others took over...
There's a change. There's a visible change.
There's a real change. There are things he never would have let happen in that show that happened later on. I'm sure you agree.
Tell me. What?
Well, there's sort of the...
Exactly what?
An alien species that comes in originally trying to be sort of this big villain, but turns into more comic relief, the Ferengi, who are super capitalistic, and they sort of bring back, in part, the issue of money, where for... the whole premise being that, well, we don't need money, and this kind of venture capitalism. Then there's this closer working with the Klingon Empire, another big baddie in the original series that has now actually had sort of a warming period from this Cold War, and they can respect each other. These sort of humans, these evolved humans, and these passionate, honor-bound Klingons.
Deeply spiritual, too.
Deeply spiritual, too. And the same thing with Romulans. Big baddies, but you sort of start growing maybe some kind of, well, there might be more to them than just sort of this portrayal that they're just the villain. They're just the fascist villain for Star Trek. There is warming of tensions between this divided sort of species of the Vulcans, the very logical Vulcans, and the very emotive Romulans, and there is desire for reconciliation. It starts with this almost simplistic utopian vision, but I think it actually humbles itself by the end. And I think one of the key players in this is actually the interplay between Picard and Q. I would argue that Q, in some ways, is actually the angel of modesty and humility that the Federation needs to be able to actually overcome its hubris and thinking that they are evolved. That, by our strength alone, we can take on the Borg. No, you can't. Clearly you can't.
The JeanLuc Picard you wanted to be, the one who did not fight the Nausicaan, had quite a different career from the one you remember. That Picard never had a brush with death, never came face to face with his own mortality.
So Q,
Clearly, you can't.
Q, who you have no idea who this is more than just a letter.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm cool name, Q. You should have got more letters on it, but it's okay. Makes
So
copying it down
Q is this sort of essentially an omnipotent being that kind of flashes in and flashes out of various episodes because he is this omnipotent being. And he's played by an exceptional actor named John Delancey, who there's not a lot of actors who appear on Star Trek who you admire for their acting ability. Patrick Stewart is certainly one of them. William Shatner doesn't get as much credit as he deserves, largely because his delivery is a little bit choppy.
Just a little bit choppy.
But he does do well in certain spots and in certain moments. We often pick on him. Brent Spiner.
But you still like watch it and rewatch it.
Yep,
absolutely.
Okay,
but Patrick Stewart and Brent Spiner consistently give strong performances. That's Captain Picard, red shirt, bald head.
Yeah.
Professor X.
No, I know who.
Okay.
I know who Picard is.
Sorry, bro.
Brent Spiner plays Data, the android with the white face.
Sure.
Like he's got.
Yeah.
Anyway, Matthew will probably drop in some stuff here that you can see later on. Oh, sorry, I wasn't supposed to mention your name.
I understand your concerns. Request denied.
But they do it. But John Delancey is this other actor who holds his own. And the interplay between John Delancey's character of Q, this omnipotent being, and Patrick Stewart's Picard literally starts from the pilot episode and goes right through the entire series, where he shows up in different circumstances, sometimes to cause trouble, other times, perhaps, almost as this angel who shows up to kind of be like, hey, just so you know, this really bad thing is coming and you need to be ready for it. And he does so in kind of a roundabout way, so you never actually thank him for it, but he shows up and he does this, and he is this godlike being, but who has a need to interact with things. And he clearly, by the end of the show, respects Picard, and Picard respects him. There's kind of this tense friendship, almost like Father Roger and when Father Harrison is here. There's this tense friendship between these two major powers kind of going back and forth against one another. I'm not sure which one's Q and which one's Picard. You guys can decide that amongst yourselves.
Just kidding. Please don't fight. We're talking about virtue. Okay.
I would say though it kind of goes further because 87 to 93, The Next Generation runs. It'd be about 90 or 91 when Deep Space Nine came on the air.
Yes, yeah.
Right, like it was sort of, they overlapped for about a year and a
yeah.
half or so. And Deep Space Nine, instead of being set on a ship that's flying around saving everybody else, they're set on a space station. But it's not like an ideal, perfectly built space station. It's one they've inherited from an occupying force that's abandoned this poor planet, and there's reasons why it becomes important.
Truly, it is the best last hope of mankind.
Wrong series.
But they stole it from them, or at least there was influence.
And what ends up happening? So you have this mixed crew that's mixed between these Federation officers who come from this utopian society where everything's perfect, and these former freedom fighters who are all of a sudden given ranks and titles and responsibilities, and they're not used to be. I mean, they're freedom fighters. They're used to essentially fighting using terroristic tactics against the Cardassians. And as the series wears on, and this one, and they really hit their stride, is when they end up, there's another big baddie who comes from far off and threatens everybody. Us, the Klingons, the Romulans, everybody gets threatened by them, and it turns into this great big war. And all of a sudden, your idyllic captain, who's always had a little tortured past because he lost his wife in a previous story, he's got to make some decisions about how you handle war. And in a sense, Star Trek, in a lot of ways, during that war, lost its innocence. Because all of a sudden, your heroic characters that Roddenberry, very specifically, your captain always does the right thing. All of a sudden, he builds an entire episode, an entire premise that turns the tide of the war based on a lie. And you watch that episode, and where Star Trek, I think, really excelled, and there'd be one or two episodes where they did this well in a season. They try and do it for a lot more, but there'd be one or two where they'd have you stop and ask yourself a big question. Is doing the wrong thing for the right reason the right thing? Now, we'd say in Christian philosophy, no, that's a definitive no. But it's interesting because you can literally see him play out that dilemma and make that decision anyway. And you can sympathize with it.
Yeah.
Even if it's wrong.
Mike, how many lights are there?
There are 5 lights.
Tell me how many lights you see.
I think Star Trek also does a really good study on what happens when the impossible happens in someone's life. I think Star Trek, being that sci-fi medium, cannot ask these questions that are really fundamental and something that we should be struggling with a little bit more than we do. The question I was asking was an episode where Picard is being tortured by the Kardashians, right?
Cardassians.
Sorry. Should be a little counter. Okay. But he's being tortured and trying to be broken to indicate that there are 5 lights when in fact there are 4 lights that are being shown.
There are 4 lights!
And it's a whole study of a man's psyche being worn down. And by the end, he admits that he was minutes or seconds away from admitting that there were 5 lights. I mean, you can't really do that in any other medium than, I think, science fiction. And I think that's something that we should reflect on a little bit more, because the question is, how far can you push the virtuous man before he breaks?
Well, and if you look through the story, Picard is the most virtuous of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when it comes down to it, Picard really is the most virtuous of all of them. I mean, Kirk was never developed to the extent that Picard was because he didn't have as much time. But Picard is the most virtuous of all of them. Cisco in Deep Space Nine, he cracks.
And he is set as the anti-Picard.
Yeah.
Like that was sort of the selling feature of DS9. You grew up, liking Picard, TNG. He's the space dad that you turn to if you have life's problems. What do you do when you have sort of this almost anti-hero? And yet, Ben Sisko becomes something more than just any other captain. He almost has a whole religious aspect towards him that is played up within the series, which is something I think, Roddenberry would never have imagined or desired or anything, and yet that's where the show goes, and I think it develops it well there too.
And Janeway is she's an interesting character, but never quite reaches that same stature that Picard does. The Star Trek Voyager, the series that came in later on.
I still have no idea. You can keep going though, because I feel like you're enjoying it and they might be enjoying it. So just keep going.
This is so like every time I try and watch Star Trek with my wife, I'm trying to explain all these things, and she politely expresses interest, but I know she really doesn't care.
Shaka when the walls fell.
Whoa, fat sarcastic Star Trek fan. You must be a devil with the ladies. Hey,
At the end of season 3 of Star Trek The Next Generation, what is probably one of the most iconic scenes from the entire story, from the entire series, the Borg, the big baddies, essentially, if you've ever read or seen the movie I, Robot with Will Smith,
but keep going.
You know when the computers basically decide that we can't take care of ourselves,
okay.
so they essentially this is what's going on with the Borg. They show up to assimilate all of everybody, humans, Romulans, everybody, bring us all into their fold and make us all them and stop us from having freedom and independence and everything else like that. But in order to do so, they abduct Picard and make him one of them. And like I can vividly remember at 10 years old watching this finale, the season finale, because at the end of the episode, Commander Riker, the number one on the show, basically has to make what is a gut-wrenching decision, which is we're going to try and blow up the Borg ship with Picard on it and give up on him ever coming back and ever being part of us again. And I mean, there's a lot of layers that kind of come from that, but I mean, there are certain shows which, I mean, back when we didn't watch everything as like serialized, where you had to wait from week to week for something new to come out. You couldn't binge watch it. There's 2 or 3 series that did a really good job of making a finale that made you want to pull your hair out. I think it's Dallas with Who Shot JR back in the 80s. There was a Simpsons episode where they mimicked that one and they shot Mr. Burns.
Was it you? I'm actually asking.
And then it was this episode at the end of season 3 of Next Generation. And this is, like I say, really where it hits stride, because the fallout from this, when they eventually do get Picard back and everything else kind of goes on, is Picard has now sort of stood by and watched them kill his friends, kill fellow Starfleet officers, and been unable to stop them. He's been essentially a tool used for this. And again, this kind of tortured soul moment that goes into it. He's sitting there trying to seek redemption. So this is where he ends up, basically following this whole experience, being abducted, being a part of this, eventually helping them win the day, so to speak, with us, because I know you're going to watch all of these episodes now. I don't want to spoil it for you. Don't. But when he's back to being human, he goes home to his family, which leads to what Father Roger was about to say.
The episode of Family, where Picard, as the new series opens up with the vineyard of Picard, he goes back to the vineyard where he grew up.
Have you ever been a stranger to yourself?
Many, many times.
Meeting his brother and his brother's family, and having these rather tense discussions, leading up eventually to a fight between himself and his brother, where his brother has this wonderful line, and so I realized my brother is human, or something to that effect. And Picard starts crying. This man, this captain, this paradigm of diplomacy, the flagship captain of the fleet, is crying because he wasn't strong enough to fight against the Borg. He was human. He was able to recognize that limit. And I think there is that growth in Picard and in our own love for him, because we can see ourselves in him. We can see that whole humanistic side, that it's not just sort of the proud captain full of hubris, but a weakened man in need of love and that care. It has these gems. It has these moments that you can rewatch and rewatch and rewatch, and you appreciate, because it is very human. As strange as, as it can be, as far-flung into the future as it is incredibly human, and something that we can, I think, ascribe a little bit more to.
But I think that's the beauty of science fiction. And I'm going to rip off Father Mark here, because I think this was a conversation we had in the fall, was that you can take human stories, and when you set them not in this world, I mean, why does Lord of the Rings work? Well, because you set us in a different world, and you can do whatever you want with us. And when you do a movie, I forget where Ladder 49 was filmed. I think it's Chicago. I think so. But you show Ladder 49. Well, everybody in Chicago is like, well, that's that street and that's that street. Like they're picking out the places. The moment you put something into the future or into a made-up land like Middle Earth, all of a sudden we're not so much worried about trying to place how this fits into our history. I mean, there are people who've sat down and said, all right, if Iron Man, was in 2006 or 2008 rather, well then, how many years passed before Avengers Endgame, and so this is...
Thanks, Obama, part of his administration.
2024, right, or 2028 when this actually takes place, where people will sit down, when 24 the series was going on with Kiefer Sutherland and Jack Bauer, it's the same thing. So if this was such and such a presidential election, well then the last season of it happens in such and such a time. And so you get kind of caught up in trying to figure out the finer details of what's going on. Whereas when you throw it 300 years into the future, all of a sudden it doesn't matter anymore. Because now you can sort of step back, enjoy the wonder. I mean, it's really funny watching Star Trek: The Next Generation now, and them sort of the things that were so futuristic and amazing are everyday things. I mean, they had these tablets. I don't know if you've ever seen like an electronic tablet with like a touch screen on it.
Whoa.
That you could get information off of.
I actually have seen one of those.
Okay. They had this whole idea that you could communicate by video, face to face. They had this, they had all these things. Like this is, William Shatner had a whole great episode of, innovation Star Trek inspired. And so you're seeing these things, you kind of laugh at them, but even more than this, humanity hasn't changed. We're still seeking for some greater meaning. We're still looking at situations in the world and in the universe and saying, it's got to be better than this. We've got to do what we can. One of the great crises that leads into the Star Trek Picard series is the fact that there was this disaster that destroyed a whole people, essentially. And Picard fought tooth and nail in historically between the end of The Next Generation and the beginning of this show. That doesn't change. There's something innate in us that we look around and when we see something horrible in the world around us, God's put it in us to want to change it.
The decision to call off the rescue and to abandon those people we had sworn to save was not just dishonorable, it was downright criminal. And I was not prepared to stand by and be a spectator.
God's put it in us to want to ask the big questions about life. And even for this atheistic series,
seemingly,
like you said, seemingly atheistic series, they couldn't help but ask the questions. And I suppose that's one of the things you hope for our whole world is that people can, as we push further and further away from religion, we're not going to stop asking these questions. Who am I? Where am I from? Why is there evil? What happens when we die? How do we respond to these different circumstances and situations?
I'm going to tag on to this, but actually go the other way. So once more, another TNG episode that I was just referencing, Darmok, is this episode that is really fascinating as Picard encounters this alien species that communicates only in references in their culture. Okay. So it's almost as if we would be talking in memes, and that would be the whole extent of our communication. It is a little limiting, but it's an interesting factor because how do you communicate something when you don't know any of the references? So Picard...
That's a good question because
exactly.
It's happening to me right now.
Sarah with her arms open wide.
Sarah with her arms closed.
So, sort of just jumping into the episode a little bit more. Picard and this captain from this other race are on this planet, and they have to fight this invisible beast that is sort of wreaking havoc or whatever. Anyways, Picard eventually recognizes a very fundamental aspect of sharing in similar experiences and expressing those experiences in the vein of stories. The story he chooses, I think, sort of shows that inspiration and I think in many ways just our own humanistic desire for a good story. It's the story of Gilgamesh. It's the story of the king of Uruk meeting up with and befriending the wild man Enkidu and fighting the great beast.
You're making up all these names now.
No,
fine.
You can actually look it up. The funny thing is I've actually been listening to the story of Gilgamesh every couple nights, falling asleep to it, because I think that's sort of fascinating. It's one of the original stories from the Near East. It's almost 4,500 years old from recorded history, could be older. So it's older than the Bible itself.
Went way into the past.
Way in the past, but the thing is, it's a story that kings and peasants and everyone in between listened to and was fascinated because it spoke about that whole aspect of friendship and the question of why do we have to die? Gilgamesh, encountering the death of Enkidu, his friend, goes on a journey to find eternity. And he meets the only two immortals, human beings, those who survived the flood, as the story goes, and he recognizes that all men must meet death as the final journey, as the final thing. And it touches something within us that makes it a classic, so that even 5,000 years afterwards, we can reference it. And I think in some ways, the stories that we encounter through the good episodes of TNG, through the great episodes of Star Trek in general are going to be those stories that we carry on as a living part of our culture, something that drives us to something more, which we as Catholics know is the divine. But it is that we have that desire within us, I think, to find that what satisfies, and these stories give us that inkling to the ultimate story.
Okay, well, you may or may not have convinced me to watch a few episodes. Afterwards, I'll ask you what those episodes are, other than family. Where do you start? I don't even know what order they happen in. There's movies and there's series and all that sort of stuff. But...
Well, all I can say is thanks for joining us on Left Footers. Please like and subscribe. And kapla!
Live long and prosper.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.